Michael's presentation was pre-recorded, so don't put questions in the app, but I think we just have to be in awe of a production line of assays that he's got in place. Our next speaker is Michael Lakeman from CH4 Global. Michael's career has spanned from the skies to the oceans. He started off work at Boeing looking at biofuels and alternatives, and he's now on seaweed. Michael, floor is yours.
Thanks, Vera. Tēnā koutou katoa. It is a great pleasure to be here today to give an update on the progress that has been made around the science of using Asparagopsis as a methane inhibitor. I'm here representing our company, CH4 Global, which was founded in New Zealand a handful of years ago and has gone on to move our headquarters to the US and can keep operating here and also establish operations currently in Australia and looking to expand across the globe, hence the name. I have been asked to give a science update, but I would like to point out that this isn't just a research project. We are a company with a mission to commercialise this technology with urgency. The why, I don't need to revisit the why, that's been talked about enough over the last couple of days. We all understand the why, and we are trying to tackle that issue and that opportunity with urgency. So we do have commercial operations, we've made commercial sales, but for today I'm going to focus mainly in on the science. So I was here a couple of years ago, and it was a really good opportunity to brief the audience. I'm sure many of you here today were here 2 years ago. And at that time, introducing the whole concept here is there's the seaweed, Asparagopsis, this beautiful organism on the right there, on the left, that when you feed it to livestock, it reduces enteric methane production. Now, as we just heard on the previous talk, there's a number of steps in the methanogenesis in the rumen. The particular mode of action for Asparagopsis is there are brominated compounds in the seaweed that are accumulated only in this particular genus of seaweed that interfere with the binding of vitamin B12 in that final step of methyl coenzyme Q reductase, and therefore you inhibit the production of methane. Now, at the time I was last on this stage, I ran through the feed trials in detail that showed that not only is this solution efficacious, 80 to as high as 98% reduction in methane production, but that it is safe. And when you follow best practices, and these have been established now through a number of additional feed trials of using a high quality seaweed at low inclusion rates in a palatable form, that's when you get those good results. Strong methane reduction, improved productivity, and no health or safety issues, no residues and no animal health issues. Of course, there have been trials where they didn't follow those best practices, and we saw some results that we wouldn't like to see. But as with any compound, if you do it wrong, you can get bad results. The key is to do it right, follow those best practices. So that was the state of the science 2 years ago. In the ensuing couple of years, there's been a continued focus on the science around Asparagopsis. A number of dozens and dozens of publications across a wide range of aspects of the biology, application, ecology, feed trials, in silico, in vitro studies, and indeed at the bottom there even patents. So this shows that there is a number of entities pursuing the commercialisation of Asparagopsis, just as we are, and showing the commercial potential there. So I'm not going to give you all the details on all of these studies, but I will focus on some key conclusions. The science has continued to prove that this solution is safe. Again, in none of these studies has there been any residues or animal health effects noted from the seaweed supplementation, that's supplementing the seaweed itself. There have been concerns voiced around the solution in that bromoform, the active compound, is known to interfere with photochemistry in the ozone layer and lead to ozone depletion. A very thorough effort in modelling a number of production scenarios for large-scale commercial Asparagopsis farming showed that even in the most pessimistic and challenging of those scenarios, there was very de minimis impact on the ozone layer. All the studies in the ensuing 2 years have shown, again, a consistent, strong methane reduction, and that's both in vitro and, importantly, in vivo studies. And we can add to the idea that this is both safe and works, and expand that to say, yes, it's beneficial. So a number of studies looking at the impacts at scale of pursuing this technology solution. So the charts here show modelling of methane emissions under a number of scenarios in the Australian feedlot sector. Of course, the top line is the business as usual, but then a number of scenarios of uptake of Asparagopsis, GWP 100 and GWP star from top to bottom there. And you can see, pick a scenario, it's better than business as usual. And we're aiming for the bottom lines there, those scenarios of highest uptake driven by the product quality and the benefits to the farmers. The International Food Policy Research Institute also did a really interesting study looking at taking up Asparagopsis globally in the dairy sector and addressing that herd to a degree where there was a 50% methane reduction globally from dairy. It's just a scenario with a lot of reasoning behind it, but it is just a scenario. The key thing being that a methane reduction of that amount actually drives $5 billion worth of savings into the sector due to reduced inputs. So this is leveraging the impacts that have been noted on productivity of feeding Asparagopsis to livestock. So yeah, some quite tantalising results there. It helps support the impetus that we are seeing in the market for developing this solution. I want to focus on a very recent publication out of Australia, Future Feed, being the holders of the patent, the IP around the application of feeding this technology, and a number of agricultural entities in the state of Victoria. They've taken an interesting kind of path to market approach here, where instead of feeding the dried seaweed, they take the seaweed and mix it in with oil. The reasoning being here that makes a stabilised emulsion, extracts the bromoform, increased shelf life that's been demonstrated. And this is the first published paper that looks at pulsed feeding. So all of the literature to this point has been in total mixed ration, feedlot style diets. In this particular study, they did pulse feeding twice a day. And that's the kind of scenario you could imagine for feeding, say, dairy cows in New Zealand, just at milking time. What they saw here was that pulse supplementation did reduce methane significantly, not as high as when it's in every mouthful of food. But we believe, and we're pursuing some formulation approaches where we would consider the ideal to be a single dose a day, slow release, giving higher than 50% reduction, potentially keeping it as high as that 80 to 90% that's been observed in TMR. Another really interesting finding in this study, where they looked at the different formulations of oil and seaweed and looked at the bromoform as well as total brominated compounds. there was evidence in there that suggests strongly that it's not just bromoform that is efficacious in reducing methane emissions, that there's a broad spectrum of bioactives in the seaweed. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as we consider alternatives. On the slightly negative side, I wouldn't say it's a con, but what we do see in this case, where you have a different matrix, it's not just a dried seaweed, but it's been extracted essentially into a solvent, even though that solvent happens to be a nice-looking jar of canola oil, that in this different matrix, the ADME, the absorption, digestion, metabolism, and excretion dynamics are different. And there was elevated bromoform noted in the milk that was produced in this trial. But I will say, and importantly, it was still at a very, very low level, order of magnitude lower than would be a concern or butt up against the maximum limit in drinking water, for example. So that's something to keep in mind and something probably that will warrant further research. So we'll talk a little bit about CH4 Global and our efforts to drive scalability of this technology. So we've been busy here over the last couple of years optimising tank-based production. We've got really high productivity, probably the highest ever recorded for a land-based seaweed production, and extremely high quality product, very high bromoform levels, which will mean we can feed smaller doses. We have built eco-parks in Northland and in development in Southland. And those are scaling from, when the Southland one is up and running at the end of this year, from 15,000 cattle per day up to 60,000 once that's fully up and optimised. And we have aggressive global scale plans leveraging investments and interest from commercial partners, downstream customers, to reach 10 million cattle a day by middle of this decade and 150 by the end of the decade. So just to conclude, this works, this is safe, there's a lot of attention on this, serious science happening. We're progressing solutions that are fit for an expanded market, and this is a scalable solution. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.